You know what I think is out this year? Calling people fascist.
That's awesome. Should we adopt that then? Is the converse then in? Like calling people anti-fascist is in?
Peace-loving Democrats. I don't know what is the converse of that.
That's a good year in the review for the scapegoats. I mean, we've had no shortage of people on our TikTok, Instagram feeds telling us that we are fascist. So I'm going to have to go ahead and take that a step further. It is out to call the scapegoats fascist.
Most certainly out. And in fact, I think it's in to give us a 5-star review.
It is in.
I hear that is a big deal this year.
We can promise you that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce will have a threesome with you if you give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, whatever the hell the kids are using these days.
Welcome to the Scapegoats Podcast. The
bonds and sold for entertainment purposes and is not to be taken as financial or professional advice.
We have a special guest on the Scapegoats Podcast, real friend of the pod if I've ever seen one. This man needs no introduction, but I'm going to give it to one of him anyways. Zach Head is a coastal elite, Hollywood insider, filmmaker, producer, basketball extraordinaire, man with multiple ACLs. Zach Head, welcome to the Scapegoats.
Welcome. Yeah, the only thing I have to correct you on is I don't have multiple ACLs. I only have one, but it's great to be here. Friend of the pod, friend in real life. Excited to chat with y'all and, maybe lend a little bit of the Southern coastal expertise.
You're a good countervailing balance to us. I feel like we can snowball and find ourselves in like Charlottesville very quickly.
Well, not that far.
Not yet, at least.
Yeah, well, hopefully I can pull y'all a little leftward. I've been trying to do that for years now, and I feel like we found a good balance with it.
What's on your mind as we go into New Year? It's December 31st. It's a good time for reflection. What's new?
Yeah, I don't know what's new, but I'm definitely a person who sets out intentions every new year. So I've been spending the last month, really reflecting on just kind of a year of creative development and creative growth. Like you mentioned, I'm a filmmaker and writer. So that's a huge part of my focus every year. And so I'm really thinking about what this next year looks like in terms of taking these next steps. And I think a big part of that is just continuing to grow in the craft of it all. I'm increasing my book goal of trying to just read. I don't read any nonfiction. So I'm going to read a nonfiction book per month this year. I'm just trying to get smarter.
Have you chosen any topics yet?
So I'm easing my way in and I'm reading a memoir. Like, I don't think I've ever read a memoir because I only read science fiction and fantasy books, but I know. Yeah, you're going to see. But it's like won the Pulitzer last year or 2 years ago. It's called Stay True. It's just about it's like this New Yorker writer like reflecting on a friendship of his from college. So I'm starting there, and then I really want to read more about like kind of like early 1900s history and like specifically like I'm curious about South America. I've read a lot of like fiction from that realm. I was really interested in magical realism a couple of years ago. So just kind of diving more into the just historical basis behind it. Cuba, communism, those kinds of things.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Are these the basis for thinking about where your next projects are headed, or is this just exploring your own interests?
It's exploring my own interests. I kind of, like I said, I'm writing a lot of genre work, so those are, a bit detached from reality, but these are just like, areas of the world that I'm curious about. I'm curious about and just China, and like also like that's a whole other side of this, right? Like another book that's on my reading list is just reading about the Opium Wars and kind of the Silk Road and just like the development that kind of took China from this isolated country to what it is today. So those are all just based on just trying to be a smarter, more educated person in this world. But a lot of my writing and creative stuff, it departs from reality. So I don't know how much of a bearing it has. And there's always a connection, right? So who knows what kind of stories and archetypes and things you find that you can bleed in. But no, those are just kind of separate goals.
Let's talk about your work a little bit.
Yeah.
So you just released this project. It's magnificent. How would you introduce it?
Yeah. So it's called Blue. I've been calling it various things. I think I've settled on calling it internet installation. And essentially what that means is it's a conceptual website that kind of evokes this like 2000 sensibility, right? As like HTML was becoming more accessible and people were, playing with like internet design. So it's 3 short films, several essays, and then just like this interactive kind of choose your own adventure experience through this website. It's all kind of but exploring this idea of how we relate to each other within the confines of technology and the internet. There's a kind of an absurdist quality to all of these films. They're all slightly elevated from our reality. There's a comedic sensibility here that's also a little bit melancholy. And I think, each of these films is like pretty bite-sized, right? They're reflecting the reality that is the internet today, right? Like you don't have these long form pieces anymore, right? Like no one has that kind of attention span. So I wanted to create something that felt weird and odd in the same way that the internet is, but also, felt could stand alone on it as their own pieces of art that reflected me and my own kind of ideas here. So each of the films is their own unique story that doesn't like connect in a literal sense, but if you were to watch them back to back to back, you would see that there's kind of a thematic development across them that is just how these different characters are relating to technology, specifically as it reaches into their physical lives.
In thinking about how, our society continues to be closer in its ties to social media, to the technology blueprint, to how one exists both online and in person, in making Blue, do you find yourself thinking about things as dynamic, i.e., we are getting somewhat closer in that connection to technology? Or do you feel, as it seems to be, at least to myself, that there is kind of a detachment point in some people where social media has been built up as this, for lack of a better term, boogeyman or something that is, permeating every existence. And so you actively reject that. Is that something you're experiencing, or do you see it kind of a bit more linear?
No, I totally experienced that. And that was, I think, fundamental in conceiving of this project was, it came about pre-pandemic. Although if you watch these films, they feel like pandemic films. I shot them in 2021. But the seed of that idea began in 2019. That's when I first started conceiving this project of having like these 3 individual kind of pillars that told like a more macro story. And that was really, an era of, I was really into Twitter, and I was, God, if you looked at my usage, the hours back then, I was probably on Twitter over an hour or 2 a day. And like, just, I think being enmeshed in this kind of digital reality, like was not good for my mental health. It made me feel more cynical. It made me feel disconnected from people. But at the same time, it also felt like the only way to keep track of the world and keep up with, the huge flow of information that is today's reality. So ultimately, like that's kind of where I landed with this project. And I still kind of believe is like, I think the internet and social media are pretty neutral. There's obvious negatives that you can extrapolate. There's obvious positives. I think that's going to take different sides depending on the person, but like at the most macro level, like these are just tools that reflect our own existence and amplify pre-existing conditions of our realities. So like we are already disconnected, even if you're not on social, rather you're going to be disconnected if you're not on the internet, right? Like how I live in California, my parents live in Texas. If without the internet, without phones, without FaceTime, like it would be really difficult for me to keep up with them and their lives and understand what's going on with my nephews and see photos of them and all these kinds of things. So it's this really important tool for allowing me to move out into the world, but also still maintain these really important familial bonds. Same likewise with you guys. Like none of the 3 of us live in the same city yet. We've maintained this friendship over years. So I'm not critical. I'm not overly critical of these tools. And I think that's where, to bring it back to Blue, that's where these films, I hope, landed. I think you can see the really cynical side in these, but I think that question comes through where there is this idea of like, are these tools making us feel more connected, or are they causing us to be disconnected? And I really just think it depends on your paradigm.
I think it's really interesting that you fall into the sort of neutral camp at the end of all that. Uh, out this year was Ted Kaczynski, rest in peace, the Unabomber. But there were a lot of questions that came up this year about, techno pessimism versus techno optimism, right? Are we optimistic or pessimistic about the future of technology? A lot of that having to do with AI,
Sure.
These new advances that seem to be coming at this breakneck speed. But there's some really cool technological advancements, whether it's like fusion energy or biotech, but then there's drawbacks as well because it changes our lives. I guess going forward, how do you feel about the progress of technology?
I mean, I agree with a lot of what you just said. I mean, I think AI is, I'm obsessed with AI. Like, I think it hit this, y'all are in different industries, but at least in Hollywood, it hit this like conversation peak over the summer where, it's building culturally this whole topic, these strikes that emerge that are really, AI is one of the central tenets of what they're striking about. And then it felt quickly like people got really over this conversation. Everyone was like, oh, why are we still talking about AI? It's overblown, or who cares? Or everything that's been said, everything that needs to be said has already been said. And I just totally disagree with that. I think AI is here to stay. I think it's going to change us as much as the internet changed us 15, 20 years ago. But AI itself, like, what is it but a reflection of us, right? Like, it's this super mind that is networked to copy the way that our brains work. It is trained on billions and billions pieces of data, but it's all this data that we've created, right? Like, I thought it was so fascinating. A lot of the stories that emerged in the spring around ChatGPT and the New York Times article where it started like hallucinating, right? And talking about, as this guy like probed deeper and deeper into like trying to like break this AI, essentially, it started talking about taking over the world and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, what is it doing? It's actually just copying what we've thought AI is going to do because of our own, twisted minds and science fiction and all this kind of things. It's learning from what we think it should be. So, I mean, I think it's going to revolutionize everything, but I also don't know that I think it's just it's still a reflection ultimately of how we think about the world and how we process the world.
Have you used it in your writing process?
Oh yeah.
How so?
I love it. I love ChatGPT. It's a research tool, right? Like I think I'm sure y'all have used this analogy before. It's a co-pilot, right? Like after using it, I'm not worried about it, right? At least right now, writing screenplays or making movies in a way that's going to make me obsolete. Like it makes reductive, obvious, predictable stories that aren't that interesting. They're not things people would want to see. Now, could that improve? Sure. But right now, like I think the use case and why, if you're a writer, you have to like be thinking about ChatGPT and AI and figuring out ways to incorporate it is like, it just accelerates research. So like, if I'm writing a script that's set in, like, for example, I wrote a script a few years ago that was set in Chile in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was set in like the saltpeter mining industry, in this whole world that I knew nothing about. And it took me 6 months to research it. And I was having to find old papers. I was having to like Google, how you Google a question and then it's like, all right, like this is embedded deep in some article and you get into that journal and then it's not actually there. Like it was just an amalgamation of all the keywords you used. ChatGPT just organizes that research so quickly. And like you can be operating, instead of having to stop everything and go research and read through dozens and dozens of pages, I can just hop into ChatGPT, ask the question, and then jump right back into my writing and just plop in the answer. And obviously you should research that and make sure that verify that information. But I think especially when you're thinking about scripts or something, there's so much texture that you're trying to create. How do you set up a trap? How do you mine this thing? How do you do whatever it might be that's like specific to your story that you can find those answers really quickly and just write much faster?
So you use it more as a research tool than, would you ever have it go in and just be like, hey, write this line? If you could feed it your script, say, and ask how to improve the script.
Would I ever? Maybe. At this point, I think I'm a better writer than it is. So I don't know that it's going to return something that's that useful for me. I've tried to do it. I've played with it. Like, hey, here's this idea. What are some other characters who might be interesting here? But I just don't find it to be very creative.
You could upload all of your writings into it and create Zach GPT.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, that'd be pretty interesting.
It'd probably have some frail ACLs.
Yeah.
It's tripping over itself. It's big on hero ball.
Yeah, it wouldn't dunk.
The conversation is fascinating though, as we kind of reach this, I wouldn't call it a post ChatGPT world, but a world in which ChatGPT has been in the mainframe for so long that it feels like we've almost reached a point of fatigue about it, where usage numbers are going down a bit. It's not kind of at the top of the ethos of conversation all the time. The wow factor isn't necessarily all the way there anymore. So it feels like we've kind of diverged from its use cases as this, magic type tool that people employ and using different to create different tasks or automate different tasks, versus the actual utility of it increasing, the numbers going down versus the applicability of it going up. And so it feels like an interesting moment where, as we look forward to 2024, is ChatGPT going to remain in the, kind of broader conversation, or are we just going to move on to the successive next thing, whether that be a whole new tool that reaches that type of penetration, or do we just employ it in different embedded structures that we all latently acknowledge but don't explicitly use, like a ChatGPT app on our phones? It's just in the background on Twitter, in the background on social media, fueling our, in the case of Blue's criticism, addiction to those types of media.
It's as dumb as it's ever going to be right now, right? Like, that's the crazy thing.
So am I.
Yeah, me too. Right. I'm learning every day, getting better. No, but it's a good question. I think that's probably a little bit of both, right? We'll get better at using it in our day-to-day lives. We'll start having more of a symbiotic relationship with it, hopefully. But also, they're going to keep running new models, and there's so much investment going towards that. Who knows what could happen. But on the other hand, there's always the case that it could get regulated more intensely, right? And that people could start getting more worried about what these systems could do. I mean, this is the dark side, right? That maybe we should be a little cynical about handing off a lot of our responsibilities to AI. I don't know. I kind of agree with you that it can augment us.
Do you feel any social pressure among your circles to participate in labor disruption, strikes on the backs of these types of tools or criticisms? Or is that kind of existing outside of your world? I guess more broadly, how did you feel about the year of the strike that was Hollywood?
Yeah, I mean, the strikes are, I'm not in the union, so I don't have an obligation to strike alongside them. There's some people who chose to really show up and be in the picket lines, and I definitely supported that. And I think that, as always, when you're operating in something that's as industrialized as Hollywood, right? Like, there's going to be the corporations and the studios are going to seek to consolidate power, and they're going to seek to not pay as much as, like, limit how much they're paying as much as possible, right? And we've seen fundamental shifts in the way content is distributed over the last 10 years. And as a result of that, there are way more shows, but each show has a lot less episodes. And so that means there's less opportunities for payment for writers, right? You might get hired onto one show. In the past, that would feed you for the whole year because you're writing 26 episodes. That's a 10-month job or however long. And now you're on a 10-episode show, and that 10-episode show is probably also being spearheaded by a more powerful showrunner who's going to write 7 of those 10 episodes. So you're getting paid for being staffed, but the real money is in actually writing the episodes. So just the structures are different now. And so the minimums that might have existed from a contract that had to do with the more historical distribution model are no longer as applicable, right? A big part of that is what's the word? I'm gonna blank on it, but when you write an episode, right, and it got syndicated on CW or whatever, every time that played, you used to get paid, right? And now that's no longer the case, right? In streaming, someone might watch 100 million hours of your show, but there was no system there in order for you to recoup any kind of benefit from that, right? A great example of that this year was Suits. So Suits got bought by Netflix, or brought onto the platform by Netflix, and it was like the second or third most watched show of the year. Like, people rediscovered Suits and loved it, and it was streamed hundreds of millions of hours, right? There's no, I guess it's dividends. There's probably another word for it. I'm blanking on, but
royalties.
Royalties. Thank you. There was no royalties or hardly any royalties that were paid out on those hundreds of millions of hours of Suits, even though that would have been the equivalent of, it being played like every single day, multiple times on, like Fox or whatever in a different era. So that I think it was really important for these strikes to exist in order to like reconfigure these models and figure out ways for these royalties to be distributed such that we're accounting for changes in distribution. So now how that relates to AI, I think that's a really different conversation. I think it was a little bit overblown, and I think that a lot of that is, I don't know that Hollywood people totally understand this technology all the time. I think writers and creatives are more emotional beings, and at times, not everyone, of course, there's lots of really smart people there, but I think there's an emotional kind of knee-jerk response to this idea that AI is going to take all your jobs, that, you know, having used it and like played with ChatGPT, it's just not there yet. But, you know, I guess good to build in those protections should it get there.
So you're saying not only is Meghan Markle not royalty, but she gets no royalties.
Yeah, no royalties there for Meghan.
That's got to have underpinned a lot of that streaming. I mean, I personally, as a ninth grader, when Suits was out, definitely had a major crush on Meghan Markle. Definitely watched the scene where she's getting dressed in front of Mike like hundreds of times. Little did I know, I had no chance in hell. I was never going to be the Prince of England, and so as such, couldn't do it.
Well, lucky for you, they're going to do like multiple Suits spinoffs now because of the success of it. So if you love Suits, you're about to get more of it.
What part of that didn't you understand? I just liked Meghan Markle.
No, I was trying to deflect that for you.
Thank you. You're much more experienced at this whole podcasting thing.
OG podcaster over here. I was doing it before everyone had one.
You were doing it back in the Apple Podcast days.
Yeah,
weren't you?
Yeah. No one else was doing podcasts back then.
I feel like that's not really
Just
talked
me and
about.
Bill Simmons.
Yeah, well, great guy. Also a friend of the pod. He just doesn't know it yet. The transition from Apple Podcasts as the main medium for consuming podcasts to Spotify, that has happened in the background over the past like 3 or 4 years. And personally, I don't ever open up the Apple Podcasts app. I
Really?
exclusively use Spotify.
I exclusively use Apple. Maybe
Really?
it's because of when I got into podcasting and just kind of my a loyalty. I don't know, or just like I'm, momentum. I've just never left. But like for y'all's own podcast and for this one, do the metrics show that most people listen to it via Spotify?
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
Definitely. It's like 85% on
Wow.
Spotify.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you listen to podcasts? What's your podcast diet look like these days?
It hasn't changed much in recent years. I feel like it actually takes a lot for me to add a podcast in rotation. And I think that's mostly because I'm not the biggest podcast listener. And so the hours that I have allotted to podcasts, which is essentially going to the gym and then a couple nights a week when I might play video games and throw a podcast on top of that, are all kind of allotted for by the 2 or 3 sports podcasts that I listen to, and then the 2 or 3 entertainment media podcasts that I listen to. And I tend to think of podcasts more as an escape than information gathering. I'm, as far as like news and stuff, I'm always a reader. I don't like watching news. I don't like listening to news. I'll always choose to go to like news sources and just read it myself. So podcasts for me are more escape than anything. So it's sports and entertainment really.
You came to the right place.
Yeah.
It's quite literally on the sign outside, a
Hey,
scapegoat
that's why I'm
show.
here.
That's funny. I'm the opposite. I exclusively consume media through audio. I listen to podcasts. I don't watch a lot of TV. Don't read a lot. I don't read a ton, but the podcasts are on 24/7. Like I quite literally fall asleep to podcasts.
So what are you doing at like 8 p.m. while you're listening to a podcast? When
Cooking
you're just
dinner, annoying my girlfriend.
so you're like talking to her while you have your podcast in?
Yeah. It's kind of like reading where, I'm not digesting every single word of it. I'm not hearing every part of the conversation, but it's on such a loop that I feel like I'm constantly plugged in to like the outside world. Just means that I'm like I'm the asshole with the AirPods in, even at work, 9 to 5.
You're like
20.
a 12-year-old.
Yes.
It's like when you watch a 12-year-old walk down the street, their mom's talking to them and they're like, huh? Like
Got the hoodie on. I'm like,
actually, I went to a wedding and one of my friends' 15-year-old nephew was there and he always had an AirPod in. And I went up to him after a minute. I was like, dude, like, what's up with this? Like, why do you always have one AirPod in? Like, are you always listening to music or like a podcast, even while we're playing like pickleball or something? Like, what is this? I want to understand. And I realized, at least for him, his use case was he was on TikTok, and it's hard to watch TikTok unless you have the audio aspect. So he just always had one AirPod in case he wanted to pull out his phone and get on TikTok.
Wow.
Yeah.
That really goes back to how connected we're becoming with technology.
Yeah,
That's literally a cyborg move right there.
truly.
Yeah. I worry about the youth, man.
Oh, me too. I've become such an old curmudgeon. I was at a movie, right? I go to a lot of movies. There's like 4 teens in the row right in front of me, and they talked the entire film, and they were on their iPads, not even on their phones. They brought their iPad into the movie, and one kid was on his iPad playing, I don't know, some Candy Crush alternative for 2 hours, and then talking, and then they were showing photos to each other's friends. I'm like, why are you even in this theater? Like, you're getting nothing from this movie. So I think it's a pretty, and it's not their fault, right? Like, we've built this world, and the generation before us built this world, and they're just, trying to feeling out their way and trying to navigate it. But man, it does feel dystopian.
I disagree. I think it's a little bit their fault.
Yeah,
It's a little rude.
we can blame them. Yeah. I'm happy
Fuck
to.
them kids.
Yeah.
I mean, man, I haven't been to a movie theater since the pandemic. I'm still
Really?
holding out. Yeah.
Why, you afraid of getting COVID there? What-
No,
what, uh,
no. I just rather watch things at home. And
Okay.
now the release schedule is so much shorter,
Yeah,
right? It's only a
for
few
sure.
weeks. So I just wait.
I have this theory with movie theaters. I had this ready for our 2024 predictions if we got into anything rapid fire, but I'll throw it in here because it's germane. I have this kind of thought that in the next couple of years we're going to see one of these streamers, probably Apple or Netflix, maybe Amazon, purchase a theater chain, and I think it's going to get bundled into the streaming streaming subscription that you pay, right? You pay an extra $10 a month, and then you can see any of these movies in theater as well. And it's all about building out more of like the entertainment ecosystem. And so you can watch it in your house, you can play games if you're on Netflix, and then you can also go into the theater, bring your friends and family, buy food there, buy merchandise for their shows and movies. Maybe you have an arcade, who knows, right? Like, I think it's just the full ecosystem, and that's is going to become a more and more important part of the entertainment bundle. And that's the next step, is bringing it back into the physical spaces.
That's fascinating. I personally had not heard that take before, but I buy it wholeheartedly, especially with all the movie theaters that have been encumbered with a shit ton of debt. They've got a bunch of M&A targets as is. I mean, AMC's like been the Wall Street bets darling for so long, and it just seems to work.
That's what I was going to say, is that there's some movie theater executives who are praying for your vision to come
Yeah.
true. It does make sense though, right? If they could get bought, take down some of that debt, right? Buy them with cash. It could work. It could work well.
And there's
And I'd be more likely to go.
Right. Like, I think there is a huge barrier to going to a movie when you think, okay, it's $20 for a ticket. I have to drive there. I'm going to get popcorn. That's an extra $10. Like, especially if you're thinking about, as we don't have families, but if you have a family and kids, like, triple those costs. Right. So, I ultimately, like, that's the tickets themselves aren't what is profitable typically for a theater. So, it's just about getting people in the door. And then I think also just, that's a way to sell your brand in a more physical way. But there's reasons that this hasn't happened already too. There used to be the Paramount Decree. Are y'all familiar with the Paramount Decree? So this was a law that was passed in like the 20s or 30s. So it was basically, it meant it existed to prevent monopolies within the entertainment space and within Hollywood. And what all it basically said was that if you're a distributor, you cannot also be an exhibitor. So if I'm Warner Brothers, I can't also own my own theater, right? Because theater, all of these early movie studios were operating their own theaters and then only playing their own movies, right? And so it was it created for a uncompetitive environment. And so the Paramount Decree basically said those had to be separated, and it improved competition, right? It allowed the birth of like independent movies, right? All of these kinds of things that created the film industry as we've come to know it. But 3 or 4 years ago, the Paramount Decree got repealed. And basically because of the streaming models and all of these new kind of economic modes have made it obsolete, it's now allowed for distributors to own exhibitors. And so we just haven't totally seen that big shift yet, but I imagine it's coming because it's only now possible for them.
So in effect, Amazon could buy for example, Regal cinema chain, play then through that distribution network exclusively Amazon Studios movies at that physical chain. Like, you couldn't go to an AMC, you couldn't go to a Cinemark to see those films under this new regime.
Yeah, I don't know if there are other regulations there. I would imagine there would have to be, especially for one of these deals to go through, that you still have to play some percentage of other studios' films and you maybe even still have to. You could probably restrict your films to just your studio or your theater rather. But
Well-
I think we would have to regulate that. I don't know what that would look like.
It sounds like they've already taken advantage of having this decree repealed because like Paramount has Paramount Plus, right? Like they all have their own streaming services now, which that's a form of exhibiting.
Well,
right?
that was
And
why
distributing.
that was why they repealed the Paramount decree, because these things were already happening, and they're like, well, this doesn't apply to streaming. It doesn't cover this part of the industry. So that was what kind of just made the whole theater piece of that obsolete within these not the distributor's priority, or it wasn't at least a couple years ago.
Are you saying that if you write laws in a bygone era, that new technology can change the intent of those laws? Maybe we should introduce the Second Amendment to those kinds of folks.
Yeah, crazy idea. huh?
Accidental Democrat.
Occasional Democrat.
Yeah, that's a great tagline for the Scapegoat show. Occasional Democrats.
Yeah.
Occasional. Yeah, that's
Very
fair.
occasional.
No, it is crazy though. I mean, with all the mergers that have gone on in media, I mean, Paramount and Warner Bros. Are discussing a merger right now. I mean,
I think that's probably going to happen too. I can't imagine at the end of 2024 we're going to still have 6-7 separate streaming services where you have to pay $10, $15 a month. Like that just, it's not economically viable. Most of them aren't making money.
I mean, at this point, it's what Warner Bros. Discovery, HBO, Paramount, right? That's the whole business name.
yeah, I think this would be dumb. Somehow Discovery is running the whole thing too. Like I don't know how they emerged on the top of that. Like the least historical brand of them all.
Nah, dude, Shark Week is just so fucking lit.
Yeah, Shark Week just went right to the top.
It is wild that there used to only be like 3 big broadcasting companies, and they basically controlled all the media dissemination. And then things separated, right? We had all the different channels and bundles and whatever from cable operators, but now it's sort of coming back together again.
Yeah.
And it's which isn't really going to change the way that our social culture works because we have social media now. And so we can never go back to the Walter Cronkite days, right? But at least it is interesting the way that power is consolidating. in that
Yeah,
industry.
we're recreating cable, right? Like we
Yeah.
destroyed cable, and now we have cable on demand, and it's just all going to be probably you choose your 1 or 2 packages. Do you do the Netflix network? Do you do the HBO network? Do you do the Amazon network? And then it'll be all of these little sub brands within it.
And it's more expensive.
Yeah,
course.
exactly. Well, it's going to have to be, right? Like think about, everyone was used to paying $100+ a month for cable, and now you're paying $15 a month for Netflix or however much it is now. I know they raise the price every 2 months, but like that feels like as a creator on the other side, I'm like, we probably do need to up that cost, because like, how can we possibly continue to afford to produce more content at these like extremely low rates, right? Like I think it reflects a lot of what the dynamics that have occurred across tech in the last 15, 20 years with the internet, right? Or even last like 5, 10 years of Uber, Airbnb, all of these kinds of services that are like, here's this awesome value for super cheap. And then they can't make money, and then they have to raise the price, right? I think it's the same thing in streaming.
As a recent victim of the Netflix password sharing firewall that's been put up, I do not look forward to the day, which is probably going to come the next like week or so, where I have to like purchase my own Netflix. I don't use the streaming services that much. I feel like an extreme outlier in that regard. I watch a lot of like, my main app on my TV is YouTube TV,
Yeah.
mostly Sunday Ticket. I need to get back in the thick of things into streaming good content. That's it. That is a good corollary to me listening to podcasts all the time, so I don't stream anything. I don't use the visual media in ways that can probably broaden my purview.
Where are you at in consuming streaming these days? Do you watch much TV?
I consume a good amount. It did feel like there was a little bit of a dearth in new good shows for a while there. I don't know if that just had to do with the pandemic shutdowns or, just the fact that, or the strikes that were going on for a
There's both
while,
of those
right?
Things for sure.
Yeah, I've done that. I've watched a little reality TV in lieu of it with my girlfriend at her behest, but I enjoyed it a little bit. But yeah, in terms of my media consumption, I'm the interpolation between you two. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I'll do a lot of visual reading and watching stuff. Unfortunately, sometimes to the detriment of both. I'll put on a podcast, then like scroll Twitter.
Yeah.
That's the worst. Then I'm just I'm consuming, but I'm not retaining anything.
Since I got the iPad, another friend of the pod, John Franey's been joking that he'll walk in and see me watching TV while I have my computer up, and then I'm also looking at my iPad, and then I'll check my phone. And it's like I'm doing I'm at the 4 screens sometimes now.
Yeah. having worked on Wall Street, that's all it is, right? You just put up 6 screens and
What should we get into your predictions? 2024
Yeah, I already gave you one of them, so yeah, let's hit the other ones.
rolling downhill.
Yeah. Well, why don't y'all give me one of your predictions first?
Oh boy. That requires us to prepare, Zach. We were just trying to make sure you got here in one piece, man.
Yeah, man. Honestly, when I was standing outside waiting to get in, a car stopped at a green light. 4 people got out and started pushing each other behind it, and like a whole fight was about to break out. And then more cars started coming, and apparently one of them decided we can't do this here and shoved everybody back into the car, and then it drove off. So that's the state of Austin around here, I guess.
Is it not PC to call that a Chinese fire drill anymore?
Yeah, it might be the new generation of one.
Not the preferred nomenclature.
fighting over the reunification.
All right, I'll give you all a prediction. All of mine were kind of media adjacent. I think that's the landscape that I know the most about. This one's a vibe prediction. I don't know that I have a lot of hard data behind this, but I think 2024 is going to be the decline of person as a brand. The person as a brand. I think we are we've hit the pinnacle of that, and I think there is a turning inward of people valuing privacy, being less interested with the lifestyle sharing that has occurred over the last decade on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and just a more casualness that at least is emerging within our age demographic, where I think folks are just less concerned with having that, really polished, specific idea of themselves that it can be marketable and shareable within the confines of social media.
Interesting. It's hard to push back on a prediction because neither of us knows what the hell is going to happen. But just
tell me I'm wrong.
I'll be the proverbial devil's advocate. How do you square that take with the idea that things like user generated content for selling, anything known to man in the direct to consumer space is proliferating? People are using different products, posting on TikTok, Instagram, etc., and that's been a main growth avenue for a lot of these brands. Furthermore, the rise of the AI influencer. And that may speak to your point, actually, the idea that we have transitioned away from the person as brand to actually just using the brand, having a conduit, a medium that is this fake amorphous quote unquote person who is the script reader for the different prompts or overall catch lines that draw people to a different product. Does that fit in that prediction or worldview?
I think it does because, I still think you have the people who are like avatars for brands. And that's obviously going to continue. That's been around for a long time, even before the internet, right? I don't necessarily see that declining. I think that what I'm more so thinking of this as is the idea that me, Zach, not an influencer, not a person with an internet brand, I no longer am as focused on creating this consistent idea of me on the internet that I can use to be like, look at Zach, here are these 3 keywords of him that you can understand if you come to his page, right? Like, I still think there's going to be influencers, obviously, right? There's like things like OnlyFans are only growing, right? Like all of these framings of the internet that have a specific human selling themselves in some sort of way. Like, I don't necessarily think those are going to go away, and they may even continue to grow, but I think you can delineate between that group of people who choose to make that their business versus the, everyday person also feeling like they have to be that sort of internet personality in their day-to-day lives within their local communities.
Have y'all heard of main character syndrome?
Yeah.
That's what this rings to, right? It's, this idea that, someone wants to be the main character in their story. And, sometimes on a social media platform, they may end up being the viral moment that day, and then they're the main character, but it changes every day. So I kind of agree with what you're saying, Zach. I think that the AI influencer point that you made, Jordan, was really good. I mean, it seems like if you can do away with all of the problems that you get from an individual's personality and then outsource it to AI, you can sort of replace that capability for a corporation. But I think the second point here is just the changing economy as well. If, the reason why so many of these brands and marketing influencers are able to do it is because they sell ads. And if you're not selling as many ads because there's less demand in the market, then there's just less demand for that. So maybe that's one way where people slow down in terms of their personal branding. But I also get it from what you're saying on the personal side too, is just like, yeah, I do value privacy a little bit more than possibly in the past.
Yeah, I think it's just gotten a little bit exhausting, right? And I also think it's the mode of consumption on these social media specifically, right? Like Instagram is TikTok now, right? Like when I scroll Instagram, it's mostly videos. It's mostly not people I follow. The stories are maybe the one exception of that, right? But even that is ephemeral, right? Like you're not necessarily building. Maybe you can build a brand over time if you post a lot in your stories, but I think it's more. For me, I treat that as a one-off. I might post a story once a month, right? Or go on a binge of it and post 5 stories over the course of a couple of days and then not post again for a couple months, right? But it's not like social media is not like it was even 3 years ago where you saw your friends mostly, or you saw the famous people that you followed posting static images of them with the ad that they're, or the product that they're advertising, right? So I think it's just harder to create that consistent brand unless you become one of those people who's like, I'm a comedian on TikTok and therefore I'm posting all of my comedy and they're popping up again and again for you because you engage with it, right? And then those people become almost like separate from your everyday folks who are engaging on these platforms.
Yeah, you build a parasocial relationship with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're trying to build some of those.
Yeah.
I was about to say, I feel the need to defend our book here a little bit as nascent influencers. Welcome to advertisers, by the way, even though we've given out a lot of free ads. Yeah, have y'all seen the rise of the AI OnlyFans influencers? People paying $5-10 a month to see.
Describe a video.
That would require me to have seen it, and that would also require me to out
Can you pull
myself
that
as
up?
having seen it. Yeah, they're goofy.
It's a little scary.
It is a
It's
little
like-
scary.
I mean, this is going back to worrying about the youth a little bit, right? If the way that they're always engaging in technology, like imagine they have their AI girlfriend in their one ear pod
Yeah.
in their ear.
It's Her, right? The movie Her.
Yeah.
Where we've either reached that or are about to reach that, right? Like already, like, there's all these studies about teen depression and then also like just like the decrease in sex, right? And the decrease in relationships and people hanging out with each other, right? I think folks are so used to having a digital filter between them and another person, right? Like it only is logical that people are going to be more comfortable having that for sex as well, right? The digital filter makes that a more approachable thing. You don't have to actually engage in intimacy. You don't actually have to talk to a person and make them like you and all this kind of stuff. So I imagine that that's an inevitable freight train that we'll have to deal with as a society, and who knows what the ramifications will be for it.
Do you have any advice to any of our listeners who may not be having as much sex as they want to? How could they have more?
I'm not the one to ask for that.
Yikes.
No, I mean, I have sex.
Perfect.
But thank you. Yeah, just to be clear, no, but I mean, I'm in a 10-year relationship. I truly, I had a friend who went through a breakup recently, and they've been trying to seek my advice. And every time they ask me a question, I'm like, I don't feel like I can tell you anything about how to date in LA on the dating apps. Like I have no clue what the faux pas are. I've got no clue what the what's acceptable and what isn't. So
You don't have any icks.
no, I couldn't tell you what that even means.
Wow, really?
I mean, I can extrapolate, but you'd have to share me the icks that y'all have learned over the years.
We can go
Yeah.
full open kimono at this point. Or maybe not, actually.
Yeah, this podcast turns into Call Her Daddy.
Yeah, well, we ebb and flow. It's like sometimes it's Ben Shapiro, sometimes it's Call Her Daddy, sometimes
Call
it's
Me
Bill
Mommy.
Simmons. Yeah, multiple different ways. Do you ever refer said friends who are asking about sex advice to ChatGPT?
No,
You don't?
I don't put them into that
Like,
stream.
Here's my ChatGPT Plus subscription.
Yeah.
Have your way with it.
I refer them to the scapegoats whenever they ask.
That's why they're probably not
Yeah.
getting laid. They're just like talking to girls on first dates. Like, why do you think the Fed is so hawkish?
The Fed?
I kind of want to know what ChatGPT would say.
I'd probably tell you some pretty slick moves, honestly. It'd be like, step 1, go to the gym, eat more vegetables. Maybe, get off Instagram.
Yeah, develop a personality.
This is the
probably
upside
would
of technology.
Yeah, it probably would give you good advice, frankly.
So you can either just fall into the technology hole and keep consuming content, or you can use it to empower yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's somewhat tangentially related, but there's a talking head on CNBC, that said that one of the reasons why men aren't having as much sex is because sports betting has become legal, which that goes into one of my favorite predictions for 2024 is that we need to be as long degeneracy as possible because we're going to be more degenerate.
Wait, say that again. Belong degeneracy?
Degeneracy is something that needs to be long in 2024, whether that be through the rise of some of these like broader betting platforms, call it poker, call it, whatever outlet one might have to gamble, even the stock market, options trading, Robinhood, etc. The despair that you described in previous points trickles into that feeling that some people feel the need to, get that outlet via gambling. Some people, not necessarily the author of this statement.
I'm pretty out on sports betting, actually. It makes me sad to see the NBA, which is my favorite sports league and something that I follow every day, be overtaken by content and analysis that is all framed within money, right? Like, and obviously, like, I know that this is all commercial. I understand that that's baked into the sport already, but I don't like that every time I'm watching a basketball game, they're like, oh yeah, and here's the betting line, and like, oh, is Luka Doncic going to score over 34.5 points? Like, I just am not that interested in it. I don't engage in sports gambling, and I don't necessarily think that is great for that to be at the center of culture for everybody, right? This idea of normalizing sports gambling to the degree of what it's going to be normalized, like with Mark Cuban selling the Mavericks, and he's going to turn the whole stadium into a casino, right? Like, I'm worried about what that does as a addiction that's only going to grow in America.
Sounds like you need to just hit on one big bet.
Yeah, I'm down a few $100s in my life, so maybe that's what's coming out.
Oh, that is a win in its own right. Only couple $100.
Well, like, the only time I really ever gambled consistently was as a senior in high school. We had Choctaw Casino about 20 minutes from my high school, so I was making about $50 a month, and I was losing about $50 a month. I gave up after that.
Those are some good returns.
Yeah,
but it's prescient in the lens of a big conglomerate like the ABC Disney company pushing ESPN Bet as ESPN continues to forward things like the betting line, the over under, juxtaposing that to the world that we lived in 5 years ago pre-Supreme Court decision where that was completely hush hush. Even the announcers, the commentators couldn't even talk about it within the games. So that has been upended so strongly. But thinking about how that is in your eyes kind of tainted the NBA. How do you view that while also thinking about like the Tim Donaghy point shaving scandal at Arizona State? Basketball's had its problems with gambling in the past.
I mean, I'm not too worried about that side of it. I think that, I do think that the Mavericks lost the 2006 finals because Tim Donaghy was there and fixing games and calling fouls and, extending the series. So I think that did influence the NBA in a certain era, but I think that the players, for the most part, care about the integrity of the game. I think the sport itself isn't as healthy of a place as it's ever been. So I'm not too worried about that from a regulation perspective. I mean, I'm sure you'll end up getting a case where a player knows their line, right? They know what the betting line is for the number of points they score, and they're like, I'm going to go force this one basket to see if I can hit the over, right? And how will we ever be able to prove or disprove that? I don't know. And, that'll be interesting to navigate that space, but I don't anticipate that to be like a major issue within it.
It is a big change. It is a big societal change, legalizing sports betting. I do wonder if there will be, if it will mess up some sports. I mean, we've already had like in the NFL, right? A few of the Lions players got suspended for sports gambling on their own team. So you're right, that does happen. At the same time, though, I don't know. I think it's fun. I think it adds an element to the game. It makes it more engaging. And it's something that, having the odds to the game, you're just getting a probability reading on it, right? Which you could do anyways. You could go on 538 and see what the probability of winning is. So to me, it adds another element to it.
For sure. I think it taps into just the more philosophical question of like, how should you regulate vice, right? And I tend to think of vice as being more of an individual question than a societal question to a certain degree, right? There's levels of, you have to regulate some
soft
vice.
on crime, Zach.
The token liberal over here.
It's a pretty conservative take on sports betting, though.
Sports betting, it is. That's one of my more conservative takes, I would say. And so regulating vice, right? Like when it comes to drugs, I'm probably like, that are alcohol, like let a person make their own mistakes, right? And we need to have some compassion for that, and there's certain drugs in certain situations that you have to step in and regulate still. But like the sports betting, right? Like it's so centralized and it's pushed by these corporations to the point of ESPN is going to be making all of its money from being ESPN Bet or whatever they're going to call their platform in the future, right? It's going to become the sports bookie, not just the sport, right? It's a total shifting of what ESPN has been, right? From news to something else. And when that's normalized, like for the most part, people who bet aren't going to be smart bettors, right? They're going to be betting off of their heart. They're going to be betting off of vibes. Like they're going to lose money, right? So that's a system that is encouraging people, hey, do this. It's fun. You can be more engaged in the game and have a little bit of stake in it. And over time, like, how many addictions is that going to create versus if you have sports betting, centralized to Las Vegas, right? When you go to Las Vegas, you can engage in sports betting. You can put some money on a team and that's fun. You're doing that. It's a part of like this experience of being there. But then when I leave Vegas, like I can't be betting on the Mavericks as I'm watching the game each quarter, right? Like the compulsiveness of like what that can become is really scary for me. So I still don't necessarily know where I land on terms of like regulating that, or that I think we shouldn't allow it. I don't know, but it does worry me.
I wonder how much of the push to legalize sports betting is driven by the gains in viewership, all going basically to the top, i.e. the NFL, with the NBA's viewership languishing around the like 2 to 3 million mark for the games on Christmas Day, compared to the NFL drawing like 20 million plus viewers or an average game on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. Not to mention the fact that the MLB is basically withering on the vine as is. So if you allow sports betting over the top, you at least give a bit of a emotional or financial stimulus check to these industries to keep eyeballs on it as it becomes a little bit more of a perhaps dying sport. But that's more conspiratorial than anything. I don't think there's necessarily a U.S. government interest in wanting to keep baseball or basketball in the ecosystem of interest just by virtue of gambling.
Trying to pacify America, make us not aware of what's going on because we're so tempted to watch sports and gamble, right?
Well, it's all about
I buy
boosting
that
the WNBA.
Hey, WNBA is on the rise.
It is.
The year of women's basketball is coming. I mean, like, I know more as a basketball fan over my whole life. I know more like college female basketball players now than I have ever known previously. And I'm starting to like kind of care too, right? Like Caitlin Clark is cool. Like like the Steph Curry of women's basketball. I'm like, what's she going to do when she gets to the WNBA, right? Like I was actually kind of following the Las Vegas Aces winning the WNBA championship this year. It's getting to the point where the talent level is finally hitting just kind of a breaking through some sort of plateau of watchability. That's hasn't totally brought me in yet, but I could see in the next couple of years, like especially in the off season when I need my basketball fix. It's like, oh, now the WNBA is on. Like I'll watch the playoffs.
That's what they should do. They should just push all of the sports gambling content exclusively in the WNBA realm. Like they will imagine Joe Biden.
That's what the liberals want.
Executive order, sports gambling legal across the United States, but you have to bet only on women's sports.
It'd become huge. It'd be
It'd
the
be
biggest
big.
sport in America. Yeah.
I think we just solved sports, inequality.
Yeah.
Stroke of a pen, Joe. You heard it here first. Also, maybe like throw in weed there too.
Sure.
Just make it an all-encompassing thing.
You get free weed when you go to WNBA games.
That's what the W stands for, right?
Well, you have any other predictions, Zach?
Yeah, I do. I got more. I came locked and loaded. This is another vibes one, which are, I guess, most of my predictions.
Welcome to the Vibe Show.
Yeah, for sure. I think y'all are going to disagree with this one too, based on earlier sentiment expressed, but I think books are back. And the reason I say that is every time I walk into a bookstore, which is a lot because I like books, it's packed. Books are flying off the shelves. I'm seeing there's like authors that are growing more and more famous. There's more conversation about books everywhere I go. And I think it's really being driven specifically by women and women's readers, female readers, because you go into these bookshelves and it is, dozens and dozens of female fantasy books. And they're all, you read the back, it's like sold 1 million copies, sold 1 million copies, sold 1 million copies. So I don't know how that'll apply to the business of books. I think there's some really interesting shifts in that I've been following. But in general, I just feel like I'm having more book conversations than ever. right now.
I actually don't disagree. I think you're right. Books are back. I also think it's a great way for us to get our friends laid. If they, if we
true,
go back
that's
to
true.
that part of the segment.
Reading books is one of the best ways I've ever made friends, right? Like I think when you read a book and you have things to talk about, right? Like, and I think people are seeing that, right? Whether it's self-improvement, whether it's learning about the world, or whether it's just like content that is a little bit more, it seems like a lot of the books that are popular right now are like more of the escapism fantasy. So
That's what I was going to say. It's an
yeah.
escape, you know, it's an escape not only from your day-to-day life, but from the instant hyper stimulating media environment that we have right now.
I think we just have too many screens. I think that's a big part of it, right? Like I'm inundated with screens from the moment I wake up and pick up my phone through working, through getting home and watching TV to, you know, I can go to the end of the day and be like, I looked at a screen for 10 hours today. Even when I went to the gym, between every set, I'm looking at my phone. So I think when you pick up a book, especially if you're reading physical books, that's the secondary part of this. I think physical books are specifically really back in. I do think it offers a just nice respite for your eyes, for your brain, and just like the experience of like living where you're like, I'm actually not looking at my own reflection all the time.
As a dedicated Kindle reader, I too believe that physical books are back. I've found that I'm in like the vast minority when it comes to looking at my Kindle, reading primarily through Kindle. And I wonder if a lot of that is because within the print medium, it allows, or I guess I'll take a step back. With visual and audio, at least in terms of storytelling, there's a tendency to lead the fish or lead the horse directly to the water, i.e. this is what happens. This is what's explicated. It's very, neat and crisp, whereas books leave a lot unstated. There's interpretation and secondary interpretations that you can make from either the author's diction, syntax, etc., which allows that conversation to foster around it. What did he mean? Thinking back to like English class, what is the second order effects or interpretations from this text versus a podcast where you have three assholes on camera telling you exactly how they feel. There's no second order instruction. So I totally agree. Thanks for typecasting us as non-readers.
You said it, Jordan. You're like, I barely read. I just listen to things.
Well, it's fair. I could be better about reading. I guess I do a better job about reading fiction than I do nonfiction. When it comes to nonfiction content, or it's hard to couch like news as nonfiction, I suppose. But like when it comes to current events and worldly stuff, definitely through the years.
What are both of y'all's favorite books that you read this last year? Put you on the spot.
I'll go first. Free publicity, and it makes me seem like a degenerate, but Billy Walters, Gambler, very excellent. It's a guy who like basically broke quote unquote Vegas for NFL sports betting. He had a life of a rags to riches story where he grew up in like a one outhouse farm in Kentucky and rose to the ranks of like dropping like $20 million on NFL games in Vegas during the 80s and 90s, in and out of prison, in and out of mafia ties, had a car dealership business and expanded to a litany of different things. I liked it much more for the story of like the rough and tumble wildcatter mindset, much more than like, it wasn't like about sports betting per se. It's just a guy who employed these kind of tactics and put risk on to ultimately find success in life. Now the book does end with him doing like a 5-year prison stint, but not everything has to have a happy ending.
My choice has a similar rationale behind it. I read a book this year called The World for Sale, which is this history of commodities trading since the 1960s. And it doesn't read like that at all. That sounds like a pretty boring book, right? But it's about these guys who are like basically just swashbuckling. I mean, the book starts with the CEO of the biggest commodity trading firm today getting airlifted out of Libya because he was doing a deal there after Muammar Gaddafi was assassinated, right? And it goes from there. I mean, there's some fascinating tales in this book just about the history, and it teaches you a lot about the ways that, the very basic goods and commodities that we use every day, all the different underpinnings of those markets. It's kind of crazy, but really the book at the end of the day is about people who are taking big risks and kind of just swashbuckling through it. How about you, Zach?
I was about to say, it's your turn now.
Yeah, mine's a very different book than the two that y'all just named. It's actually I got to give a shout out. It's the biggest book series I've ever read. It's called It's a fantasy series called Malazan, Books of the Fallen.
I read the first one.
You did? You
Yeah.
read Gardens of the Moon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Great book.
It is. It's a really good book. I feel like it's a book that you also need to read the next 9 to really fully understand. But it took me about 1.5 years to finish this series. And I read the last 3 books to start this year. They're each about 1,300 pages. It was the largest, most comprehensive series I've ever read. And it's it's operating within the context of kind of classical fantasy, but it's also a series that really sought to subvert a lot of these tropes. So it's not really a palace intrigue type story. It's not like Game of Thrones where there's kingdoms warring. It's much more about it's about an empire who is seeking to colonize these different continents, and each of the 10 books basically takes place from a different perspective on different continents. So you end up by like book 5, for example, jumps to a new continent that's on the other side of the world. And there's like 2 characters you've met from the previous 4. And ultimately the author is an anthropologist and an archaeologist. And so he has this really interesting perspective on like the history of how humans came to be, just like from evolution. And so the books are seeking to kind of mirror that, even though there's obviously like fantastical creatures and all sorts of like magical things, but it's a really, really like hard fantasy series where there's stringent rules, stringent guidelines of how the world came to be what it is. And there's no specific hero. There's no prophecy. There's no savior. It's really, there's no good or bad guy even. It's really just all these people and creatures and beings with like differing perspectives and how they kind of come together to within this one specific macro storyline that develops over 10 books.
It's very metal.
Yeah.
It's, you know who's a big booster of that book series is Michael Burry, the hedge fund manager from the Big
Really?
Short. Yeah. He loves those books. He was tweeting about them a lot at the beginning of the year. That's why I read
Oh,
it.
that's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
You should keep reading them. They get, there's some of the best books I've ever read in my life. There's some moments like it taught me, I feel like it retaught me how to read hard books. Cause like
It's a hard read.
it is a hard read. And they're like book 9, for example, it says at the beginning of the book, like the foreword is like, look, this was supposed to be one book, but it got too big. So this is actually 1/2 of 2 books. And so there's no ending to this one. It's just going to hit a midpoint and stop. And you got here. So good luck. You can finish this. And it's truly 1,200 pages with no resolution. And so there was like moments in that book, there's like a 300-page section of that where you're following some regional conflict. You're like, why are we living in this right now? And you just kind of have to, it taught me how to just like push through and finish those kinds of books. And ultimately it was quite rewarding.
I'm not a big fantasy guy.
Yeah.
So
this one's not for you.
Yeah, this one's for the girls.
Ladies.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more predictions?
I've got no other predictions, but I have a game if you want to play a game.
Please. We're
Let's
gamesmen.
go.
All right. So I've had this, I've observed this year that I'm really good at coming up with really shitty, half-baked business ideas. And they'll pop in my head and I'll start to tell them to people and people are like, yeah, like, okay, like maybe there's something interesting there. And I have no clue what to do with them. So I kind of wanted to like treat you two as 2 of my more business savvy friends. I wanted to treat this a bit as like a Shark Tank and tell me what you think about my shitty business ideas.
Perfect.
The goat tank.
The goat tank.
My idealized self is Kevin O'Leary.
Yeah.
So this is perfect.
All right. Dibs on Mark Cuban.
All right. So do you want me to start with the shittier ideas first or the better ideas first?
Surprise.
That's for us to decide.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll start with the stronger ideas and then we'll go from there. So actually the first one I came up with on the walk here, because I was trying to like make sure I could remember my shitty business ideas. And this one's not a business idea. So I'm already breaking this game. And it's not shitty either. It's actually a really good idea. It's secular church. So let me break it down for you. Right. I went to, my family's very religious. I went to church, and you go to church and like, sometimes you're sitting there and you're like, it's kind of cool. Like, like maybe I don't identify as a Christian. I don't necessarily believe in all of these things, but like the vibe here is like everyone's coming together and it's very communal. Right. And like so much of what I think is difficult in the world right now and cause a lot of strife is this lack of community. Right. Everyone's like, how do I find community? How do I make friends? Right. It's really difficult. Right. And so what if we just had a church where you go and they play like Kanye? Right. Like you just like, everyone's playing like like Gold Digger, and everyone's just like dancing, like, playing. You have like a rock band at the front. It's like very Joel Osteen, and you just strip away like the sort of modicum of Christianity, and it's just a rock concert. And then like you have a guy, like a professor, who's like, yeah, this month we're doing Sartre, and and like it's like a philosophical conversation. And then maybe the next month it's like a guy who's telling you how to like invest your money. And then like, that's like your services. And then like Wednesday nights, like you come together and you do community service for a little bit. And then like, instead of like vacation Bible school, it's just basketball camp. Like I think that you could build all sorts of things into this, and it's just like a community center.
I think you just invented the country club.
Hey, country club, but for the people, the people's country club.
I mean, this is speaking my language in a multitude of different ways, starting at the top with Kanye and ending with a community bonding mechanism. I didn't grow up in the church. My family was very secular, very, against the confines of organized religion. But having my first experiences with organized religion and seeing how it brings families together provides an access point for the different values that you support. I'm in on it, especially if the values are rooted in Kanye culture, rock culture, basketball camp.
Yeah, it's about being cool. So it sounds like you say it's hot. What do you think, Matt?
I think, well, for one, I think there's definitely a high demand for that, right? Like, it certainly seems that there is a crisis of meaning for a lot of people. And probably in large part, that is due to the fact that religion has declined so much over the past, call it 70 years. I don't know what secular church looks like. When you say that, it conjures in my mind a ton of different images, whether it's like a music festival where people are, are really tapping into that same spirit. I guess my question would
Mushroom
be
Mondays.
yeah, just doing an ayahuasca retreat. I mean, that's the question though. Is like, what is sacred about secular church? Right?
Yeah,
That seems to be the thing that's missing. It's like, what is the deeper underlying thing that's actually bringing people together, other than some amorphous idea of connection?
Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet. I think it's mostly vibes. But I will say, like, the contrary point to that is there's universalist churches, right? There are some of these things that seem to exist to fulfill this same kind of idea of being secular. But my understanding of those, having not really attended them, I haven't attended them, but my understanding is that there is still like this focus on spirituality that I think when you don't have a specific philosophical story or idea or like narrative that can underpin that spirituality, I think it's too amorphous to really stick, too amorphous to really build a culture around, right? So to me, this is more. It's almost like skewing that idea that you have to have this spiritual underpinning, and it's more just like, how do we build a community? How do you creating interest groups where people can meet friends, talk about things they're interested in, learn, have a place to like drop off your kids on a Friday night, right? Like I remember that growing up in a church where my parents would drop us off at the activity room, and we would hang out with all the other kids, and all the parents could go out and have dates or hang out with each other or just like create their own kind of experiences, right? So creating public spaces for that. And I think that's what differs from like a country club in my mind, is like not mandating that you have to pay thousands of dollars to be a member here, and instead creating more of the church model where you can just show up and participate in it and like truly just join a community.
I will say the other thing that this reminds me of is like secular Judaism. It sounds very similar to that.
Yeah.
That is one example of that. Now, obviously, that's a higher barrier to entry thing,
Sure.
For most people.
Thousands of years of heritage.
Yeah. Oops. Oh, but it's fascinating because there's definitely demand for that. So,
Yeah.
Good idea.
Cool. Love it. Check one for one. All right. Next one. Let's, this is much different. Hexagonal fridges. So just think about it for a second, right? You have a fridge. The standard idea of a fridge is you just open the door and you pull out your milk and your cheese, and it's hidden behind your pickles or whatever, right? And you forget, that your leftovers are going bad in there. That just the construction makes no sense, right? I'm always stuffing things into my fridge. So a hexagonal fridge, it could even be an octagonal fridge if you wanted to get crazy, right? Or a quadrant fridge, right? Like there's lots of ways to go this, but let's stick with hexagons, right? You have your cheese fridge and it's like a little triangle. You open the dairy side and then it's perfectly optimized for dairy. You got your cheese stacks and you have, then you spin it and then you have your beverage quadrant, right? Your beverage quadrant has specific places for cans, has like different modular aspects so that it's perfectly built for your whatever need you have, right? You have the freezer one. And the outcome of this is you never lose anything in the fridge, right? And you can, and we can make this as high tech as we want, scan the item as you put it in. You can click a little button, it spins around to bring you the whichever side you're looking to pull, right? And maybe it even changes the way that we think about fridges, right? We stuff fridges into little like corners of our kitchens, right? Like maybe we need to make the fridge the center of the kitchen, right? Like just change the whole paradigm of how we're using spaces.
101 level question. Is this hexagonal fridge flush against the wall, like Price is Right style, or are we doing it like Wheel of Fortune style where it's on the ground and you're rotating?
Wait, what do you mean on the ground or rotating?
So like, is the hexagon like propped up against a wall or is it flat?
Oh, it's propped. It's standing. It's standing. It's like shaped like a candle, like it's, I don't know. That's a terrible analogy.
So it's a prism. It's
yeah.
Can I introduce you to this?
It's vertical.
It's
vertical.
Have you heard of gravity? It feels like gravity would get in the way of this idea pretty quickly.
Why would gravity get in the way of a hexagonal fridge?
When I'm accessing my cheese at the top portion, and then I think, oh, broccoli sounds nice too, and I spin the Price is Right wheel and go down to the bottom, the cheese is now facing down. I get that you can modular it away, but this feels like it's a recipe to have like all my shit strewn in every direction.
No. You're not dumping things up and down, right? You have the door facing you, and when I click the right button, it spins 30 degrees, and then the next door is facing me, and I open that door, and when I close that door, I click spin 2 doors, and it goes another 60 degrees. And
all right, I'm out.
You're all right. All right, that's the point, right? Like like half-baked ideas. It sounds like we got a couple knots.
Let's see how these hexagonal fridges do at our secular church, and then we can move forward.
That's how the secular church will make money, is the hexagonal fridges. All right. The next business idea I have is it's kind of building on the idea of ice cream trucks, right? So think back when you're a child, you hear the little song, you're like, sweet, a little sweet treat is about to be in front of my door. And you run outside, you go to the park, you see the kids lined up on a sweltering day. We're taking that concept and we're just turning it into a corner store. So I've seen this live on 6th Street in Austin earlier, a couple days ago, for vapes. There was a vape ice cream truck where it pulled up along the bars late at night, and it's like, here are all your nicotine products, and people ran towards it, bought their vapes, right? So let's just take our corner store ice cream truck, and you don't need a specific location. You just have a big van that has candy, snacks, has cold brew. It has all the different things you might need during the day, right? You have your morning treats, you have your afternoon needs, you have your Tums, and then late at night, you have your munchy snacks, whatever, right? And it just drives to the places where people are in the mornings, right? You drive to the parks, you drive through the neighborhoods, and you have some song that tells everyone it's the corner store trucks coming by.
Honestly, I kind of like it. It's similar. So one problem with pharmacies is that the front of the store area for them doesn't actually make them any money. They just try to get as many people as they can in the store with their prescriptions. But if you're just traveling around, you're going to run into plenty of customers.
Yeah.
So I can see that.
Yeah. Go where the customers are. You like post up at a mall during Christmas season, right? And you're just in the parking lot, and you're like, oh yeah, I could get some candy. I could get some Pepto-Bismol, whatever it is, right?
That's interesting in the context of pharmacies, because it's the opposite way for gas stations. Gas stations make no money on the gas, make all the money on the front of house, like the margin on the candy bars, chocolate, etc., which is exactly what you'd be selling with this. My key issue is you're going to have a catchy ass song. And if the 6th Street vape guy isn't already using No Smoke by NBA Youngboy, then he needs to do it right now, because that's the perfect thing that would get me running out of this podcast studio and try and get a vape, because I would love one. Right about now.
Sure. So it sounds like hot or not. It sounds like hot. Y'all like this idea?
I think we're doing it. Let's get
cool.
the truck.
All right, cool. This is there's actually an investment that's a portfolio that's coming out of this afterwards. All right. This one, I don't know. Y'all have told me you're not cat people, so I think you might hate this idea, but modular cat towers. So think about a cat tower, right? They're always gray and ugly, and they just have that little carpet for cats to scratch. Instead, let's make it colorful, cool, and actually like an aesthetic piece of furniture for your house. And then you also build it such that there are boxes or little attachments so you can add limbs and different things to it so that you can customize it as you go, make it seasonal, all sorts of things.
You read me wrong. I'm all in. I like this.
Sweet.
This is
John
so-
Franny also already owns 50% of this idea. So I am co-opting his idea just so to give a shout out to him again.
We'll lever up his
Yeah,
portion. One of the key secular trends that I'm big on, 2024 and beyond, in addition to degeneracy, is long pet ownership. I think we're going to have a lot less kids being born in households, and that replacement for that motherhood, fatherhood type feeling is owning more cats and dogs. And beautifying the cat tower seems like a perfect idea for that. I'll cut a check today.
I don't know, man. I don't know. How okay. What makes current cat towers not modular? Can't you just stack them together?
No, because normally like the top, right? I think it's like the typical structure of one is like, it's like the tree model, right? Where you have a little carpet base, you got like 2 wooden posts, and then you got another carpet base, and then it ladders up into like a little sitting area for the cats. And I have looked this up. There are some modular cat towers in the market, but they're more focused on the modular side than the aesthetic side. So they're like, look at like, here is this pole, and then you can attach something to that pole so you can get another sort of like scratching post or toy or whatever for your cat. And they don't look very good. And I think the key to this is like, it needs to be able to be sold in like an Urban Outfitters.
Do the cats like these things?
Yeah. Cats sit up in them all the time. Scratch them so that they can like, like keep their claws from being too sharp. They like to look out the window. They like to have little cocoons of safety.
Okay. All right. You sold me.
Cool.
Let's do it.
Sweet. Oh man, we're doing pretty good over here. Only hexagonal fridges are failing. That was my favorite one too. All right. I'll round this out with one that's not as much of a business idea, but one I think is, every time I pitch this to people just poke holes in it, but I think it's a great idea. And that's public fruit trees. I think instead of like on all of our street medians, especially in big cities, we should just put like plum trees and apple trees and all sorts of things. And that way you can feed populations. It's just like, if you want to take a piece of fruit, you can take a piece of fruit. Creates jobs for the people who, there's a city workers who have to come and clean up the rotting fruit. And maybe there's a whole jam industry that opens up for cities. And it just beautifies cities in general. So public fruit trees.
I mean, that might work in LA.
It would work in LA. That's
sure
really
it's
what I'm
working
thinking.
Out here in Texas.
No. In Texas, as a son of a father who loves to grow fruit trees in every which way in our backyard.
Oh, you have fruit trees in your backyard.
We have a lot of fruit trees.
What kind
in
of
our
fruit
backyard.
trees?
My dad would kill me if I wasn't able to rat them off the top. Fig, apple, pear, little bit of mango. All things that are like not super. Mango. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You wouldn't
The
have.
Durrani fruit stand.
It's
It's a lot of variety.
There's a lot of money in a banana stand.
Is your dad making like fruit pies with this fruit? Like, what are y'all doing with your quantity of fig?
So he loves to like harvest them, but the issue is that about half of the yield gets just like eaten by random birds and pests. Like he just like loses it. It's like not viable, not good to eat,
You're
etc.
feeding the community.
Yeah. I guess it is public in the sense that other creatures are being able to use it, but not necessarily like the parts of the population you might expect. It's fun though. It gives him also a lot of like joy
Sure.
to do it. So maybe
Connection
like
to the
it.
land.
I like it. What was your first tree be?
Apple trees. Apples are hardy. I think maybe oranges, because I think oranges would probably grow really well in LA specifically. And they also, I'm trying to think of fruit that could fall and still be eaten, like, because you'd have, I'd imagine lots of wind kicked up by these large cars driving by, birds, all this kind of stuff. So, and I'm just an apple guy also. I love apples. So yeah, let's say apples.
How do you plan on monetizing this? Are you
Oh, it's
thinking
not.
about
No. This is not to be monetized. This is a public utility.
it's not fruit tree as a service?
It's being planted by the secular churches.
With the tithe.
Yeah.
And then you take the fruit and put it in your hexagonal fridge.
Yeah, exactly. Then the church sells the jam. Yeah,
Mm.
it's all an ecosystem.
Those are good
Well, that was
ideas.
great.
Yeah.
That was a good
Yeah.
segment.
Thank
I
you.
enjoyed
Thank you.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
love being able to share my half-baked ideas. Now I can come up with some new ones this year.
That's part and parcel of our experience.
Yeah.
Just firing from the hip, and you look back on it afterwards, and you're like, that was fucking dumb. Should we do plugs? Do you have any plugs?
Check out Blue. It's at blue-the-trilogy.com. You can also find it at my Instagram, which I'm sure Matt and Jordan will share. Yeah, check it out. Send me a comment. Let me know what you think. I love just hearing people's feedback on it.
Yeah, we'll also put it in the show notes too, so it's
Sweet.
easily accessible.
Definitely.
You don't have to keep up with all the dashes.
Yeah, a lot of dashes.
Damn.
Well,
Well,
thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
dude.
thank y'all
you.
for
This
having
was
me. It's
fun.
been a blast.
This
We'd love
was
to come
fun.
back.
we can,
Nice.
yeah, we can call it.
Should we just Happy New Year?
Make some man, take things over.